The city woke up like it always did, half asleep, half hungry. Glass towers blinked in the sunrise, buses hissed at the curbs, and a sea of people moved in rhythm. Heads down, minds elsewhere. You could almost hear ambition humming through the streets. And in the middle of that current, where everything felt too fast and too loud, there was a little girl standing still. She couldn't have been more than 6. A pink dress brushing against her knees, tiny shoes a little scuffed from the playground. Her name was Sophie. She held a worn-out toy rabbit in one hand, its fur faded from too many hugs. Her eyes, big, brown, endlessly curious, followed the river of adults hurrying past, all in a world she didn't quite understand yet. Next to her stood her mother, Clara, mid-30s, hair pulled back, a faint tiredness in her face that came from years of holding everything together on her own. She was a translator for one of the city's most powerful businessmen. She didn't make a fortune, but she made things work. Rent, bills, school lunches, all balanced on long nights and early mornings. That day wasn't supposed to be special. Just a quick stop at the office before heading home. Clara had no choice but to bring Sophie along. The babysitter had canceled last minute. She promised it would only take an hour. Sophie didn't mind. She liked the tall buildings, the glass that turned the sky upside down. No one could have guessed that this ordinary morning was about to split their lives in half. The car waited at the front entrance, black, sleek, polished to a mirror shine. 3 men in dark suits stood beside it, scanning the plaza. Security. Or at least they looked the part. Inside the building, Clara was helping her boss finish a meeting. The man was everything the city admired. Rich, disciplined, built from nothing. A name that made headlines. To Sophie, though, he was just Mr. She'd met him a few times before. He was polite, but distant, like someone who had forgotten how to speak softly. When the meeting ended, people flooded the lobby. The sound of heels, chatter, elevator dings. Mr. Ling, that was his name, thanked his guest with his usual calm smile, shaking hands before heading toward the exit. Clara followed a few steps behind, Sophie by her side. The plaza outside gleamed with morning light. Everything felt normal, too normal. Sophie's eyes drifted again to the men by the car. They were talking quietly, almost whispering. One of them glanced toward the building entrance, then at his watch. Sophie tilted her head, curious. She'd heard her mom practice phrases in different languages at home. Snippets of French, Spanish, Chinese. Sometimes Clara would teach her small words just for fun. And it was because of that tiny random habit, that Sophie caught something she wasn't meant to hear. The men were speaking in Chinese. Not the simple words her mother had taught her, but enough for her to catch one phrase. Short, sharp, terrifying. The bomb is under the seat. At first, she thought she heard wrong. Maybe she misunderstood. She tried to remember the words again in her head. Bomb. Seat. She wasn't mistaken. Her fingers tightened around her toy rabbit. Her heart began to thump in her chest. She looked at her mother, busy adjusting a stack of folders, and back at the car. Her throat felt tight, like her voice was trapped inside it. The men kept glancing toward the entrance. One of them shifted uneasily, muttering something about the bridge. Sophie's stomach turned cold. Her mother crouched beside her, noticing how pale she looked. "What's wrong, baby?" she asked softly. Sophie didn't answer. Her eyes were glued to the car, her lips trembling. Mr. Ling appeared at the door, surrounded by assistants and real security. He was smiling, talking, unaware that death was waiting just a few steps away. And then Sophie did something she didn't think she could do. She shouted, "Don't get in the car!" The sound cut through the air like glass breaking. Every head turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the traffic outside seemed to pause. Clara froze, horrified. "Sophie!" she hissed, grabbing her arm. "What are you doing?" But Sophie's eyes were fixed on the black car. "Don't get in," she said again, her voice shaking. The men in suits stiffened. One of them quickly reached for his earpiece. Another took a slow step back. Their eyes darted toward the businessman, and in that split second, something in their expression gave everything away. It was fear. Mr. Lang hesitated mid-step, frowning. "What's going on?" he asked. Clara could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She had no idea what her daughter was talking about, but the panic in Sophie's face was real. Too real. "Wait," the businessman said finally, lifting a hand. "Don't touch the car." The words fell heavy on the plaza. Real security moved instantly, forming a perimeter. One officer knelt, opening the back door slowly, and then, in the silence, they all heard it. Tick, tick, tick. A sound so soft you could almost pretend it wasn't there. Then everything exploded. The blast ripped through the plaza like thunder. Smoke, fire, metal twisting. The car shattered into a storm of glass and steel. Clara threw herself over Sophie, shielding her as debris rained down. People screamed, alarms blared, the ground shook. When the chaos settled, Clara could barely hear. Her ears rang. She looked up. Dust in her hair, tears cutting lines through the soot on her face. The car was gone. Only a burning shell remained, and somehow, they were alive. Mr. Ling stood a few meters away, his suit torn, face pale, disbelief frozen in his eyes. One of his real guards was shouting into a radio. Two of the fake ones lay on the ground, restrained. The world had just shifted, and no one yet understood how. The plaza was chaos, sirens wailing in the distance, people coughing through clouds of dust, security shouting for everyone to stay back. The acrid smell of smoke clung to everything. Sophie buried her face into her mother's shoulder, trembling so hard she could barely breathe. Clara held her tight, rocking her as if to remind herself they were still here. Still real. She could taste metal in her mouth. The sound of that ticking, then the roar, was still echoing in her skull. When the smoke finally began to clear, Mr. Ling approached, limping slightly, a thin cut across his forehead. His perfect white shirt was gray now, his composure gone. For a moment, he simply looked at them. This woman and her small, terrified daughter, and he didn't say a word. Then his voice broke through, low and shaken. "She saved my life," he whispered. Clara blinked through tears. "What?" He turned to her. "Your daughter. She saved me." If she hadn't spoken, he stopped. The words wouldn't come. By then, the police had arrived. Paramedics rushed through the debris. Sophie clung to her toy rabbit, the fur now singed at one ear. She didn't speak, just watched as officers cuffed the surviving imposters. Two men who had worn the same dark suits as his real guards. The truth would come out later. The imposters had slipped in through a subcontracted agency, part of a carefully planned assassination attempt. That day, however, all anyone could feel was shock. Hours later, in a sterile police station with white walls and flickering lights, Mr. Ling sat across from Clara and Sophie. He looked smaller somehow, like the explosion had burned away the distance he always carried. He glanced at the girl hiding half behind her mother's arm. "You were brave," he said softly. "Braver than most adults I know." Sophie didn't answer. Her voice still felt locked somewhere deep inside. Clara tried to smile through exhaustion. She just did what she thought was right. He nodded slowly, eyes unfocused. "I've had people around me for years, guards, advisors, people paid to protect me, and yet it was a child who noticed, who cared enough to speak." His voice faltered. "No one's ever done that for me." The next days were a blur of news coverage, investigations, and endless interviews. Headlines flashed across every screen. Business magnate saved by child's warning. But cameras only caught the surface. They didn't capture what happened after. When the reporters left, when the noise faded, life quietly shifted. Mr. Ling began visiting Clara and Sophie often, not out of duty, but because he wanted to. He'd bring small things, groceries, flowers, sometimes just tea. The first time, Clara hesitated at the door. It felt strange to see him without the armor of wealth around him. No suit, no entourage, just a man who looked uncertain how to thank someone. "I don't want anything," Clara told him softly. "We're just glad you're safe." He smiled faintly. "I know. But maybe I can do something anyway." It started simply. He asked about her work, her late nights translating contracts, her struggle to keep up after her husband's passing 2 years earlier. She tried to brush it off. Everyone had struggles. But he listened, really listened, in a way few people ever had. And he noticed how Sophie would sit at the table, drawing quietly while her mother talked. Sometimes she'd hum little tunes, sometimes she'd ask how to say words in other languages. The child's curiosity fascinated him. One evening after dinner, Sophie asked, "Did it hurt? The explosion?" He paused, caught off guard. "No," he said softly. "Not like you think. It was loud, and then everything stopped. But what hurt most was realizing how close I came to not seeing another day." Sophie looked at her toy rabbit, thinking. "I didn't want you to get hurt," she said. He smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "You gave me something I'd forgotten existed. People warning me because they care, not because they're paid to." Weeks turned into months. Slowly, the strange connection between them grew into something more human than any business deal he'd ever made. He began funding language programs for children, his idea, but in Sophie's name. When reporters asked why, he said, because one little girl taught me that understanding a few words can change everything. For Clara, life didn't suddenly turn into a fairy tale. There were still bills, still late nights. But there was also a new peace, a reminder that courage could come from anywhere, that even a quiet life could ripple into something larger. And for Sophie, the world felt bigger now. She still carried her rabbit everywhere, the ear forever singed, a reminder of that morning. Sometimes she'd walk by the plaza with her mother. The glass towers stood untouched, as if nothing had happened, but she'd always stop for a second, looking up at the sky reflected in the windows. One afternoon, months later, the three of them met there again. The plaza had been repaired, polished back to perfection. The city had moved on, as cities always do. Mr. Liang stood beside them, hands in his pockets, watching the sunlight bounce off the steel and glass. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think success was about never stopping, always moving, always building higher." He paused. "But that morning, it reminded me that none of this matters if you forget how to see people, how to listen." Clara smiled gently. "Sometimes it takes a shock to make us look around." He turned to Sophie, who was tracing circles on the marble with her shoe. "You didn't just save me," he said. "You reminded me what it means to live." "Thank you." Sophie blushed, looking down. "I just didn't want you to get hurt." He crouched beside her. "And that's exactly what the world needs more of." The three stood there for a long moment, watching the city hum around them. The same city that had nearly swallowed them, yet somehow had given them back something deeper. There was no music, no applause, no miracle ending, just three people bound by a single choice, a child's decision to speak when silence would have been easier. If this story touched your heart, please share it. You never know who might need a reminder that courage can come from the smallest voices. Because sometimes, the bravest words in the world are only a whisper, spoken by a child who refuses to stay quiet. Don't forget to subscribe to Echoes of Kindness. Stay tuned with us for more stories like this.